Alex, we've been giving you a lot of kudos, but I haven't put you on the spot by asking you to talk about a particular project. So I'm hoping that you could maybe share with us, an example or two of some of the buildings. You mentioned when we were talking in preparation for this panel, a property called Voters Block, and maybe you could share with the audience how the Housing Authority worked with the development community on that.
Voters Block, you were talking about the underground in Rochester. People have heard of Susan B. Anthony, right? Okay. Well, this is the site where she cast her vote. And I don't know if it's on the web. I don't think we were able to bring it up. But part of what we did is, and I cannot take credit for this, by the way. I just signed the paperwork like the third week after I started the job.
You get to take credit for it.
But I am gonna. Yes, actually, I think there's somebody here who was involved in there, Mr. Brett Garwood, which is with HDR now. He was a board member at the Housing Authority back then. But by the way, great project. I mean, one of the Voters Block. One of the things that we have is some 40 units, but in the front is a cafe. And if you can go to 1872cafe.com and you look at it, I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful experience and a beautiful restaurant. The good thing about it is that we also work with Corpus Christi, which what they do is somewhat of a re-entry program for employment. Now, I try to make all my meetings there, and I go there constantly on a weekly basis. The problem is that I never become a regular because there's always new staff working on the restaurant because they're part of the re-entry program, so they don't know what I want each time. But I go there constantly. But just seeing the new people coming in and actually getting the work experience is great. Across the street, we also have something called the Frederick Douglass, which hopefully you know in history as well, part of Rochester. And what we have is units, but the first floor is commercial as well. So that's just outside of what we call the inner loop in the city of Rochester. And one of the things that we're starting to see in that neighborhood that we haven't seen in a long time is the folks that work in those areas are now walking there. And what you are seeing now is people in suits and ties, kind of like trickling into there and asking the other folks if it's okay to walk by there. So what we're starting to see is just an expansion and a mixture of the community. So again, those are two projects that are great. And go to the website if you want to take a few samples and know a little bit more details about the project.
And I'll also tout the work that Brett and the Housing Authority did, and Brett Garwood from State Housing HDR is here in the audience with us. Thank you for being here. And again, I think it speaks to the commitment of communities to working on particular buildings that really matter. I had the opportunity to work on a property which, interestingly enough, would not be characterized as supportive housing by any of the definitions that we use, a building that was developed as senior housing, but over the years has served almost all people with disabilities and some very severe disabilities in that property. Services are provided by a number of different not-for-profits who come in and provide services on site, owned by a for-profit owner though, originally financed under a HUD program. And the Housing Authority, we were doing a conversion under the RAD program of the existing expiring old HUD rental assistance to new project-based voucher contract. And it's again just about working with a housing authority who gets it and who wants to be a part of the development process and to facilitate development. We had to do inspections of every single unit in the building. It was about 400 units, and every unit had to pass in order to qualify for the project-based assistance. And while the inspectors did their job and made sure that everything was in passing condition, they were willing to work with management to make sure that things got corrected that could be corrected. They worked with us on that timing so that we could execute the contract prior to going to a closing, because of course the lenders and investors all wanted to see it. So it's really another way that housing authorities, and we're now working with both HPD and HCR on a number of developments like this, some of which are supportive housing developments. I don't know if anybody went to the panel earlier where David Downs was talking about the Caring Communities project. That was a mod rehab contract that we converted over to project-based vouchers with HPD. Same thing, working with a housing authority who wants to see the deal happen, get the contract executed. They understand it's part of the financing package. JoAnne, when Alex was talking about people wanting to go buy the Frederick Douglass apartments and have the change it's made in the neighborhood, it made me think of something that, again, has come up repeatedly today, which is about the problem that we always are confronting of NIMBYism. And given the population that you're serving, one would have to think that you would have had a tough time, and not for no offense to any other neighborhood in New York, but particularly on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, getting that project sited and then having the ability to do a second facility on the same grounds. So can you share with us some thoughts about how you addressed the NIMBY concerns and overcame them?
It actually was a very moving experience. We purchased the property at the right time in the real estate market. In 1998, we purchased what had been a building abandoned for over 20 years in the empty lot behind it at 140th and Riverside, known as the Castle in the neighborhood. And it was the site of drug dealing. There were crack files underfoot. It was a menace to the community, and the neighborhood was more scared of us than it was of what they had. So we were told by the consultant we worked with, because we'd never done anything like this, that we would never get community board approval and that we needed to get a property zoned as of right. So we did that, and as soon as we purchased the property on the private market, we started meeting with anybody who wanted to meet with us. And some of the meetings were kind of hairy. I remember being in the basement of a building where there were 500 people and they were all screaming at us. And one woman was standing against the wall saying, "You're bringing them in to rape our daughters." And one person said something nice and they jerked the microphone cord so that it disconnected. And it was wild. But what we heard from people was that this was a community that had been the victim of what I call hit and run human services, where people had come to a vulnerable community, dumped vulnerable people, made a lot of promises, and then not been seen again. Only the people they dumped were seen. And so what we realized is we needed to show up very simply, just like good neighbors, and we needed to be there. And so we started going to 6 community meetings a month, and that was 12 years ago, and we're still going to those 6 meetings. And it takes that kind of long-term investment. Our goal was that if somebody had an issue, they would turn around and talk to our representative and we'd clear it up. And what happened was we built an advisory board that included the people who most didn't want us to be there. And most of those were long-term residents who really cared about the neighborhood. And when we started looking like we were making the neighborhood safer, they turned and they became our supporters. So when we opened the castle, we had huge opposition. Our building plans vanished from the building department. We had stealth attacks. I mean, it was quite remarkable. By the time we were ready to develop the empty lot, we spoke to our advisory board, and instead of saying, "We don't want you here," they said, "We need housing too," because Harlem was going through a change where the affordable housing was vanishing, and the people who'd kept that neighborhood stable through the crack epidemic, through all the trials, weren't able to be there or to have their kids live there any longer. So what we ended up doing, totally shocked by it, was building housing not only for our population, but for the community as well. We kind of backed into Olmsted accidentally. And so we have mixed housing. And the neighborhood was so supportive that the community board went to city council asking for money for us. They showed up at the groundbreaking, they showed up at every step. And the only problem we had with the community when we opened the new building was that some people tried to talk to their city council people to squeeze in relatives who didn't meet the income requirements. But at this point, we couldn't have a sweeter relationship with the neighborhood. And it was about doing what good neighbors do and building trust and showing up.
And I think I remember you told me a story that one of the community boards actually uses your space,
Oh,
space
yeah.
for meetings.
The community board meets in our house regularly. When Columbia was expanding, they had to send police to protect us because the meeting was so hot. And we're now a voting site. So the voting polls
Wow.
are in our building.
That's great.
And we also do a Halloween thing, a haunted castle, and we terrify the neighborhood children every Halloween.
That's great. Shola, in your opening remarks, you talked about some of the projects that NYCHA has worked on. You talked about working with Canva and done development. You also, just because I worked on the project too, you mentioned having worked on some project based in Vash. Are there some projects you'd like to highlight for the audience that NYCHA's been involved in?
Actually, your previous question about NIMBYism actually is really interesting to us because I don't think we suffer from NIMBYism because we're in all of your backyards already. But I think the challenge for us in thinking about transformation is really building credibility with our residents And in order to do that, and JoAnne is exactly right, it requires a long-term investment and a sustained conversation with our residents, which we really haven't done in a very long time. And so, one of the reasons, people ask, well, why are you all over the city? Is because I think it's been very important for residents, for our team members, our staff, to sort of to have the ability to talk and to share what they believe to be their ideas and solutions about how we will preserve and transform the housing authority for the next generation. So, so this engagement or conversation is more than just a way in which we're working. It's really a value that I believe, and we've brought to the agency, and really have it hopefully infiltrating the entire agency in terms of the way we work. In terms of projects that I think are really interesting models for us, I think there are a number of different models. Folks have heard me talk about senior housing as being a critical need for us, not only because it meets an existing need that we have, which is right-sizing our apartments, but also ensuring that people can age in place and age in their communities. The Pominock houses is a great example of a senior housing development with on-site services in the community, allowing people to move to a brand new building with best-in-class services on site and still maintain those important community connections, which we know are critical oftentimes for people's physical and emotional well-being. So I'd like to see many more projects like that, but really within the context of what does it mean for the residents in our buildings today? What does new development mean within the context of rehabbing, reskinning, all of the things that we're looking at that will transform the way we look so that we can preserve this asset for the next generation.